All right, folks, Nye River family, we have today with us, we have an interview with a Vietnam War veteran, Mr. John Thompson. He is a grandfather of one of my students, Cole Pearson, so we're greatly appreciating him joining us today. And first of all, thank him for his service in Vietnam and for answering our country's call to go fight in that war. So we have Mr. Wagner here with us as well. We just have a few questions for you, sir. You just start off, what branch of the service did you serve with?
Regular Army.
Regular Army. Okay. What year did you join?
In 1968, November of 68.
1968. Okay. And how long were you actually in country in Vietnam?
1 year.
1 year. Okay. Was that 68 to 69 or?
No, 70 to 71.
70.
Initially after training for 6 months in the States, they sent me to Germany.
Okay.
And I was assigned to a security company. And everything was classified, so they never did a debriefing on it. So, but I was transferred over to a medical unit because they were shorthanded on mechanics.
Okay.
And I was a mechanic by trade. And then we did some other things besides that, which I cannot talk about.
Sure.
And out of the clear blue sky, just one day they called me in and said, "We got orders for you to go to Vietnam." I said, "That's awful unusual to take somebody out of Germany and reassign them to Vietnam."
Yeah.
Never could find out why. But so they said, "You're leaving." That was a Thursday, and they told me I was leaving Sunday.
Oh, wow.
And I fought it, and I went to the chapel. And finally, I got a 2-week leave to go visit home before I left. And I arrived in country. Well, first I had to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, and go through a week of what they call it in-country training, where they had mock Viet Cong villages, things of that nature.
Oh, wow.
And then after a week of that, they sent me directly into Vietnam. And I remember arriving early in the morning, around 4-ish, and we were all nervous. We didn't have any weapons. We were just, bare naked, really. We just had a set of khakis on, and we got on these buses, and the bus windows were covered with protective screening. So, your dream, you're waking up out of this dream, so you really know you're in a combat area. And they took us to this replacement company, gave us all an orientation. And we were right close to the perimeter. And I remember just when the orientation was just about over, we came under a rocket attack.
Wow.
And so we all ran for the bunkers and so forth.
That was soon after.
That was like 2 hours after I hit the ground.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And then the next day, they assigned me. No, I'll take that back. They sent me from there. I landed in Cameron Bay. And then they sent me to Long Binh, which was one of our larger compounds in Vietnam, probably one of the largest ones. And they sent me to a replacement company. And they really didn't know what to do with me. So I said, well, why don't you just, my background. I said, the classified part we can't talk about. I said, but I was assigned to a medical unit. Why don't you just sign me to a medical unit? And if the Army Security Agency wants me, they'll get me. So they assigned me to a medical depot down in Cameron Bay. So I flew back to Cameron Bay. And the motor pool was down on the perimeter. It had sand berms all the way around it. And I was stationed there about 3 months. But they constantly kept trying to overrun the airfield down there.
Is that right?
So we were constantly on alert, on call.
Okay.
And then I remember about after 2 months of being there, we had one of the biggest typhoons in history hit Cameron Bay. So we all left for high ground. And the majority of those motor pools were pretty much wiped out. Everything was covered in sand.
Oh.
So they had to dig out. So they sent me, they said, look, we need you to go to Long Bend. We have a unit up in Long Bend. That was actually the headquarters for the depot I was at. So they sent me there. So I went up there to Long Bend, thinking I was going to be pretty safe up there because it was the biggest compound in Vietnam, and the protection was supposed to be a lot better. But you're really not protected anywhere from anybody because everybody saw the war. You know, there's no getting around it, no way, why, you know, no getting around it. You know, one time or another, you know, we were constantly under a rocket attack one day or another. You know, it was just most daily.
Forgive me of the geography of Vietnam, but is that in South Vietnam, or was that in like right on near the border with North Vietnam where you were
Oh,
stationed?
no. It was southern Vietnam. We were not far, probably 30 miles out of Saigon, which was the headquarters.
Okay.
I mean, the capital of Vietnam, which was the headquarters. And it was a culture shock. You know, as soon as the sun came up after that rocket attack, I saw all the locals coming to work, and they were all wearing black pajamas, silk pajamas with straw hats. I call them teepee hats. You know, they look like a teepee. So it was a real culture shock.
So most of your enemy attack, most of your enemy attack would have been Viet Cong.
We got hit by the NVAs a couple of times. You know, probing, constantly harassing. The night really belonged to the VC. You know, we admitted that. You know, they knew the country better than we did. They had tunnels, everything. So we try to limit our operations to daylight operations. You know, for the most part. Luckily, I wasn't involved in those search and destroy missions and all that stuff out in the field like our comrades were. The majority of the people in Vietnam were support troops. About 10% was the actual combat troops. And all the other 90% were, you know, support troops for mechanics, medics, hospitals. The thing that bothered me the most about being where I was at, we were right across the street from a field hospital. And you could hear the helicopters coming in and leaving every day, you know, constantly around the clock. And you knew when they were coming in, they were bringing in a bunch of wounded, you know, people. And I decided to wander over there one day and see what was going on. And they just wouldn't allow me anywhere near the place because, you know, they had so much going on, so much drama, and so forth. So you constantly thought about that. And my only thing I wanted to do was to survive and get the hell out of there and go home.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have any mixed emotions at the time about should I be here or should not be here. We all knew. I did have a lot of animosity against the news media because the way they portrayed the war and everything else. You know, they really didn't portray what was happening to the average soldier while we were over there. They were constantly talking about the politics and, you know, how we're losing the war and all this. My personal opinion was if they had stayed out of it and the politicians had stayed out of it, let us do our job, we could have finished it in a year or two at the most. We couldn't go to Laos or Cambodia to chase them. And I do remember one time a friend of mine showed me all these pictures. He happened to be on a search and destroy mission, and they did go into Cambodia. They found a cache of weapons and ammunition. It took them 6 months to destroy. And it took a whole army of combat engineering to destroy all the weapons. It was just unbelievable. They would hit and run and go back across the border constantly.
Right.
So I wasn't worried about a win or lose situation, to be honest with you. All I wanted to do was get the hell home and survive. So,
well, let me back up just a little bit. You enlist or drafted in the Army?
Pardon? I would join. I joined because I was afraid I was going to be drafted.
Gotcha.
And they told me, of course, they lied back then. They said, if you join Army, I promise you, if you sign up for 3 years, we promise you, you will not have to go to Vietnam.
Right.
Okay. So, of course, they kept their promise. They said, we'll send you to Germany. I said, okay. I got to Germany. I stayed maybe a year. And that's when, you know, I got orders right in the middle of my tour of Germany to go to Vietnam.
Right.
So anyway, I didn't mean it. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to be able to give you just a short answer, you know.
No, I don't want you to. This is excellent. Everything you told us is excellent. That's what we're trying to get kind of perspective of somebody who was there and what their day-to-day life was like, what they saw. So you were a mechanic, you said, working
Yes.
on vehicles. Okay.
Yep.
All right, Mr. Wagner, do you have any?
How did the heat compare Vietnam to to Virginia, which gets pretty hot here in the summer?
It gets a lot hotter there. You got to remember. See, in Vietnam, they have a monsoon season, and you're familiar with monsoon. You know, it would rain for 6 months. You'll get an occasional storm and so forth. And then during the monsoon, when it rained, it would get chilly. You would have to actually wear a jacket, you know, because of the rain and so forth. But one thing that sticks out in my mind more than anything else, I remember when I would leave my hooch, I'd look across the street, and there was the border, the perimeter. And on the other side of that perimeter was nothing but orange dirt, hard clay, like we have here in Virginia. But after being there for a while, I started doing some research, and that used to be a rubber plantation. And they went in and sprayed it with Agent Orange. And I think that stuff killed everything. I mean, nothing could survive that. And I would remember I would come out of my hooch right at the beginning of the monsoon season, and the ground was so hard it was like concrete. And that rain would come down so hard that you would have a cloud of orange dust up to about 4 inches above your knees. And your uniform actually would turn orange. That's where it came up, the nickname Agent Orange. And I was in one of the most highly concentrated areas where they sprayed it. And we knew when they were spraying it, we tried to get indoors as often as we could. But about 7 or 8 months when I was there, I started to develop these rashes, real itching, burning rashes. And I went to the dispensary, and they diagnosed it as an unknown toxin. And they thought it was with chemicals that I've worked with, you know, working on the vehicles, like gasoline and parts cleaner or whatever else, you know, that we would use to clean the parts. You know, when you have to take engines apart, you know, you have to clean them. And so that's what they suspected at the time. And so anyway, and I know also it was really weird because one side of us was the hospital, another side was the perimeter, and on the back side of us was the morgue, the Long Bend morgue, and LBJ, what they call it, Long Bend jail. That's where a lot of the American prisoners that were criminals turned out to be criminals, soldiers that were tried for criminal acts. They put them there, and it was also a POW camp in there as well.
Wow. Okay.
You know, so you got all that going on at the same time, and so whenever you're off duty, you drank as much as you could when you could. Some people, I don't know, there wasn't that many drugs over there as they claimed, like you see on the movies, Platoon and all that. I didn't witness any of that. I mean, I knew some guys were smoking pot, but you know, at that point in time, nobody really cared. You know, they're all worried about it. All they wanted to do was get home, you know, and stay clean.
Mr. Thompson, when you returned home, what was the mood of the country, the country's reaction? Like when you see veterans coming home today, and you know,
well, it was a big difference because I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do remember one of the questions was, what was the saddest part, the scariest part? Well, it's a mixed emotions on that. I remember when I was getting ready to leave Vietnam, we had to go to a holding area for 3 days. because they had just brought in these drug analysis machines. And there was a lot of heroin in Vietnam. Okay. And it was 96% pure. And I did see a couple people try it and smoke it. And a $2 a day habit in Vietnam turned out to be a $2,000 a day habit back in the States, because they could get it so cheap. And that was part of the psychological warfare that the communists were using against the Americans. Okay. So they were trying to screen not the marijuana users so much out of it, but the heroin users, because they didn't want them back in the States with that kind of, and they would screen them out and they would dry them out, clean them, get them clean and so forth before they sent them back home. So I had to wait 3 days. And of course, I always had 2 strikes against me because my last name always starts with T, Thompson. There's a lot of alphabetical order stuff.
You were always at the end of the line.
Yeah, always at the end of the line. It seemed like, but when they had special assignments, I happened to see be always in the front of the line for some reason. But, I just remember that. But they had me within 50 yards of the perimeter, and I'm laying in the bunker, like in this bunker with no weapon, I know anything. And all I could hear was the helicopters flying up and down that ravine all night long with their spotlights on. And you're just wondering, you say it to yourself, damn, am I going to make it? I mean, I got all the way through this and I got 2 days left. Am I really going to get out of here? Well, I got to finish telling you this story. So I finally get to the airport, which was across town in Benoit, hotbed for Viet Cong and NVA action all the time. The first cab was over there. And we were getting ready to get on the airplane. And it was a good quarter-mile walk from the air terminal. And it was just basically a Quonset hut to get on the airplane. We got halfway to the airplane and red flares started going everywhere. So we knew we were under attack. So we all made it back to the hangar, to the bunkers around the hangar and so forth. And this went on about 3 or 4 times. Every time we would try to get to the airplane to take off, we'd come under a ground attack. Well, we finally get on the airplane. And when we got on the airplane took off. I thought I was on a rocket ship, because the plane just basically just went straight up in the air. And you could see the tracers and so forth. They were shooting at the airplane. You could see them pass the airplane and so forth. But for some reason, we had to do an emergency landing in Japan, and nobody really thought about it or suspected it. And they said they had to make some emergency repairs or something. So we were there a couple hours, and we get back in the air. And so the next place we land was Alaska. And it was like a 5 or 6 point landing. The airplane kept tipping back and forth, back and forth. And I look out the window and I see one of the wheels from the landing gear passing the airplane. And apparently, when we were under ground attack, it probably did some damage to the landing gear. Of course, we were really, really, concerned. We got off the airplane, and they said they were going to have to, it's going to be 12 to 18 hours. And I remember we had a 2-star general on the plane, and he said, I don't know, he said, I got 220 combat veterans sitting right here. And he said, you're telling me they got to wait another 18 to 24 hours to get home? He said, you need to find another airplane, get these parts flown in, or do something, because we're leaving out of here. He said, I don't care if I got to take an Air Force jet, C-5A, we're getting out of here. So they got us back on the airplane. And we landed in Oakland. And of course, we all made it safe and sound. Everybody was cheering and clapping. I think about everybody on that plane got out. When they did, they kissed the ground. But I remember us landing. This woman from the USO came on the plane and said, look, we're going to take you into the welcoming center, and as you're going in, you're going to meet some protesters. And we're asking you to refrain yourself from taking any action on them. And they explained this, they're going to have blood, fake blood. They're going to be spitting on you, things of that nature. And I remember I was the only one that stood up. And I told him, I said, ma'am, I'm going to tell you what our general said back in Alaska. I said, you got 220 combat veterans in this airplane. And I said, and I doubt if he or anybody else on this plane is going to be able to hold these guys back. I said, I highly recommend you go talk to these protesters because these guys are not somebody you want to deal with right now. I said, weapons are not. So a couple of them did try to break the lines and they threw some bags of blood and so forth, and about 6 of our guys went after them. And of course, the airport security just turned their backs and they're like, hey, protesters, you're at your own risk here. We're not getting involved with that stuff. So after about a brief skirmish, they took us in and took us to the mess hall and gave us a meal, and all that, steak and all that. But the real thing was when they were processing us out, there was no declassification, no debriefs, no anything. Here, get your uniform, sign your papers, get your money, and get out.
Yeah.
And then when you were finished processing, last thing they did, they paid you. And then you remember the old movie theaters where you had the crash bars when you got out, when you would go out the exit, or a gymnasium or anything. That's basically what it was. And there you go, the door shuts behind you and you're back to the United States. Like nothing ever happened. It was like you were in a different dimension, a different world. Because less than 24 hours ago, you were in a hooch, with all kinds of things going on around you. And we got a taxi, me and this one other guy, and we went to the Oakland airport. And they said, we don't have flights back to the East Coast. You got to go to San Francisco. So we said, okay. He said, you have to take the shuttle. So we said, okay, what's the shuttle? He said, over here. And we go over to get the shuttle. And it was a helicopter. And I said, you got to be kidding me, right? And they said, no, it was a commercial helicopter. But I remember the co-pilot must have been a Vietnam veteran because I remember when we got about 20 feet off the ground, me and this other guy just subconsciously stood up by the door and ready to get the hell out of the helicopter. And that's exactly what we did as soon as they opened the door. We didn't wait for the steps or anything. We just jumped out of the helicopter and started running towards the terminal out of instinct.
Right.
And nobody bothered us. They calmed us down and so forth. And but some people would walk by while we were waiting and spit at us and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, people pretty much left us alone because I think they were afraid of us more than anything else.
Had to have been tough coming back from a war scenario and going right back into normal life. So I know that had to be difficult.
Oh, it was hard to transition.
Yeah.
I mean, you go, and I remember I'm applying for jobs, and I got like 5 or 6 job offers, and then when I go into the personnel and sign the paperwork, they said, what is your status? And I would tell them, and they said, oh, okay, I'll be right back. And no less than 3 times I had them say, I'm sorry, our boss just hired somebody else. And the only the unemployment rate for Vietnam veterans at the time was about 80%. That's not an exaggeration. And I just couldn't beg, borrow, steal a job. But then when Jimmy Carter became, and I don't care what people said about his presidency or how good he was or how bad he was, he threw the Vietnam veterans a lifeline. He passed the VRA Act, which was a Veterans Readjustment assignments that if you had a Vietnam veteran, and they threw in all veterans during the Vietnam combat era, that you apply for a federal government job. If you qualify for that job, they had to give you that job first over anybody else. And if it hadn't been for that, it would have been really hard to get a job. So anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Do you still get together with other Vietnam veterans?
No, no. When I left Vietnam, I looked down at the ground and I saw a couple firefights going on, fires burning, you know, a couple villages, you know, so forth. And I said, that's where it's staying. This is just it's a nightmare. I don't want to relive this thing. That's where it's going to stay. I said, and I chose not to. I didn't see the point. You know, it was just a chapter in my life. I wanted to, as the old saying goes, just turn the page.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying I'm sorry I went. I'm glad I went, to be honest with you, because I felt at the time I was doing the right thing. And we were trying to do the right thing. And I cried half the way home because I just felt so sorry for all the innocent people over there that they had, half of them had no clue what the hell was going on. All they were dirt farmers trying to make a living. And the VC were taking advantage of them. They would go in and raid their village, grab the chief's daughters, hold them hostage, make them work for the VC, carry rockets at night and things of that nature. You know, if they didn't cooperate, they would execute them and things of that nature. And then we would go in and try to help the villagers. And they said, please, we don't want your help. If we take your help, the VC's going to think, you know, we're cooperating with the Americans, and they'll come in, and they did. You know, if we put a new roof on a building for them or something like that, the VC would come and burn it down and kill half the people in the village. You know, that's what they dealt with over there. So I still feel bad. The thing, I do have some animosity. I do have animosity against the Vietnamese people because the Koreans, I can say this, and I don't care who hears this, and I want them to know, they should have fought for their country more. The ARVNs, the regular Vietnamese nationals from South Vietnamese Army, you couldn't depend on them. They were supposed to meet you somewhere and rendezvous and be your backup. They wouldn't show up half the time. Or they would, I remember once an incident where they were trying to get wounded people out of a firefight, and the ARVNs were holding onto a helicopter trying to escape, trying to get on the helicopter, and the helicopters couldn't take off. So the door gunners had to get out and just about break their hands to get them off the helicopter. And since I've been home, I've run into so many Vietnamese people. I don't have any animosity against them, those. And I know a lot of them are refugees and sons and daughters of refugees, second generations. But in all my lifetime, I only met one Vietnam civilian that ever thanked me for anything.
Really?
It was like the gut feeling was they felt like they were entitled. That we were supposed to fight instead of with them. You couldn't train them. They didn't want to be trained. You know, I don't think they won any parts of the fight. But if they had stood the ground a couple of times, we could have done a lot better job. And they could have defended themselves. They were well equipped. They were trained. We left them all the equipment in the world. That's why the communists were able to roll around Saigon in such short order after we left. It was only a matter of a couple of weeks. They couldn't even hold the country for 2 weeks. But that's the sad part of it. All those 56,000 American lives that we lost, you know, too. And I can say all those guys, 90% of them, those guys, their hearts were in the right place. They were trying to do the right thing. Yeah. They didn't go to Canada. They didn't tear up their draft card. They did what they thought they needed to do. Right. And that's what I have strong animosity about. Other than that, it's just another chapter, turn the page, you know.
Well, Mr. Thompson, let me say again, thank you for serving in Vietnam. You're the kind of person that makes our country work. So we appreciate you. Thank you for your service.
Sharing out these experiences. I know that's difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm good.
yeah.
I hope I didn't bore you.
No, not at
No,
all.
you did not.
No, we do this kind of thing, in a history class. Hopefully kids can get a better understanding of actually what went on. And instead of just reading it out of a book from a historian, to actually hear it from
Right.
someone who lived it means a lot. So we thank you. If you don't have anything else for us, you can go ahead and click the hang up button. And I'll give you a call later. Just again, thank you, and go over a couple things. But I think that's good for now.
Did I answer your question?
Oh yeah, you
Yes.
did great. Thank you.
I don't know what else, I don't know what else to say. It's just, everybody's got different emotions, I guess, about it. I just, like I said, it's just a chapter in history and turn the page. And I did learn a lot about life itself.
Right.
Like I said, the point is, it's not a disgrace to join the military. It's not a disgrace to serve your country. But not at all. If you have political problems with it and so forth, don't join. It's not it's like a lot of reserves. I remember going on when they were complaining that they got called up. I said, hey, look, guys, you signed up for it. I said, you're getting the checks. So now you got to pay the piper. Time to pay the piper. But anyway, all right. Thanks, gentlemen. I hope I answered your questions, and I hope I wasn't boring.
No, certainly not. Thank you, sir. Go
Have a
ahead
good
and
day.
click the hang up button. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Mr. Wagner, just to follow up on our interview with Mr. Thompson there. Quite interesting, don't you think?
Is real interested in just to go over a couple of the terms that he mentioned, and we mentioned in our slideshow. The enemy in Vietnam was the North Vietnamese. They called them NVA. That was the regular army, the trained army, communist army, and then you had these other soldiers or other folks fighting for the North Vietnamese, called the Viet Cong, and they were South Vietnamese communists who supported the North. So he mentioned no fixed lines, and he mentioned you never knew when you're going to come under attack, and it was that constant feeling of combat or having combat all around you.
I think the thing that struck me most was upon his return home, how he was treated, and just to go from war to re-enter society. That's tough. Usually nowadays, I think they have a debriefing period, the soldiers do.
And soldiers coming home, I mean, they come home to a country that's, patriotic and supportive. And he was saying he saw some terrible things, the protesters, and, you have a right in the country to protest, but the disrespect, the spitting he mentioned, and some of those horrific things, that had to be quite a shock. It was a sad time in our history.
Sure. We thank him again for doing this interview. We hope you enjoy it. It's always good to get it directly from someone who experienced it. So until next time, we'll see you next week.